Good evening, and welcome to the Do Tell Story Swaps Telebration. My name is Katie Mangan, and I shall be your host for this evening. Brandon Spars, the swap facilitator, can't be with us tonight, nor can Sabine, our student teller. But we are thrilled to have Sharon Elway to share one of her amazing stories. We have a great lineup of tellers and a wonderful evening planned for you. And thank you all for being here. Joining us tonight, Tim Araneta, Brother Ben Tucker, Kenneth Foster, Sharon Elwell, and Rose Owens. These are our tellers. I'm first going to give you a brief history of Tellabration. Tellabration was the brainchild of J.G. Pinkerton in 1988. His vision was to create an event that would introduce new listeners to storytelling. The first event took place in 6 towns across Connecticut. Today, Tellabration is celebrated in every continent except Antarctica. And now, let me read to you the Tellabration Proclamation. In the name of storytelling, the National Storytelling Network, the Storytelling Association of California, and the Do Tell Story Swap of Sonoma County are proud to sponsor Tellabration. Tuesday, November the 11th, 2025 is hereby proclaimed to be Tellabration, the worldwide event of storytelling. Perhaps at this event, or this moment, across 6 continents in 40 states and 9 countries, from Sacramento to Savannah, Boise to Barcelona, West Virginia to West Indies, Singapore to Santa Rosa. Audiences are gathered for this spectacular storytelling event. Without further delay, in joy and anticipation, let the stories begin. So our first teller tonight is Kenneth Foster. Kenneth founded the Do Tell Story Swap with Elaine Stanley in 2010, and it's been going strong ever since. Kenneth uses a lifetime of experiences to create and share his own stories, as well as stories handing down to us over time. He spent his childhood in the countryside of New Mexico and his teen years in the San Francisco Bay Area. In 1966, Kenneth joined the Navy and served for 6 years. From 1968 to January 1970, he was stationed in Vietnam as a hospital corpsman with the Marines. He later worked at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory as a chemical technician. He was in charge of the laboratory's outreach program called Fun with Science, and he told lots of science stories to hundreds of kids. It is appropriate that on this Veterans Day, Kenneth is sharing 2 stories from his time in Vietnam. The first story is Firefight, and the second is Sick Call. Please welcome Kenneth Foster to the stage.
Thank you. Are you going to make my view bigger or not? I don't know. I'll let you. Okay, you got it. So everybody hear me? Can see me? I've never told this story sitting down, so that's why I'm standing up. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about my day today. The elementary school here in Ephraim puts on a Veterans Day program, and they sent letters out and invited all the vets that could make it to come to the school. And so it's been a pretty emotional day with the kids singing all kinds of patriotic songs and doing the Pledge of Allegiance, and it brought me to tears. So I just want to tell you, 57 years ago this month, I was standing out in the heat of the day. The sun was beating down on me, and even though I had a hat on, It felt like the sun was just burning my scalp. I was checking all the supplies in my medical bag. My mind was racing. I was anxious and yet not really afraid. As a Navy hospital corpsman, I was assigned to the 1st Marines, 7th Battalion, and sent to LZ Baldy, which was southwest of Da Nang. The LZ was a landing zone for helicopters coming and going in the area. I was standing out there checking my bag, making sure I had everything that I needed. I was thinking about all the other things I might need. Did I have enough water? Did I remember my sidearm? Were my boots tied? I had only been in country 2 weeks, and this was to be my first patrol. At 25 years old, I felt like a brand new baby. I didn't know what was going to happen. Like all firsts, it's something you never forget, like your first kiss or the first time you drive solo. I remember how I felt and what I was thinking. This particular patrol was to be a cakewalk. It started late in the afternoon. It was extremely hot, and the harsh vegetation of the surrounding area was in contrast to the soft red soil that was wet and clammy. There was water everywhere, which you tried to stay out of. Now, the Marines in the squad that I was going out with had been in country for a while, so that made me feel a lot better. I had checked and double checked my medical bag. I was ready to go. And the lieutenant, he was finally ready to go. And so we were off. And everything was going well. In fact, I even remembered some of the training that I'd received at Camp Pendleton. So that was a plus. We'd been out about 4 hours when the lieutenant decided to turn around and head back towards the LZ. Darkness fell on us right away. And about halfway back, we were ambushed. Now, I have to tell you, there were some very anxious moments as I was trying to dig a small hole for myself. The more I dug, the smaller that hole looked. The zing of the rounds going off around me and overhead was enough to make me hold my breath. And the yelling from the guys in the squad, get down, incoming, was almost as frightening as the gunfire itself. Now, there was shooting from our guys, but mostly digging in and taking cover. I finally got myself into that little hole and I felt around, make sure my limbs got in there with me. The lieutenant was calling the names of all the guys. Now, I'd met some of them, but I didn't know them well enough to put a face with a name. But they knew who I was. I was Doc. And every single one of them wanted to know where I was. The firing was pretty steady on all sides. Tracers were going overhead. It was pretty intense. Bullets were hitting close enough to kick dirt up into your hole. And then the flares would go off, which lit up the entire area, and the firing intensified. I was still holding my breath and watching what was going on. My job was to watch and to wait and see when I was needed. It never occurred to me to pull my weapon. And with all of this stuff going on, it seemed like time stood still. And my mind switched to rapid, fast forward thought. I was thinking about all kinds of stuff. Like, what kind of wounds will I see? Do I have the right bandages? Am I good enough to save a Marine? And I remember thinking about the tracers going overhead and how beautiful they were. And I was thinking, who picks the colors of the tracers? Do we use blue because we're true blue? And the gooks use red because they're commies? Who chooses the colors? And what was that poem Mrs. Griffin was trying to get us to learn in 10th grade about keeping our heads when all about us are losing theirs? I was wondering if that was literal. How low can I get in this hole? And just then, a young private jumps up and starts running towards the enemy, firing his weapon. And I'm thinking, oh no, what's this crazy grunt doing? Get down, you're not John. Shoot, 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 shoot. And then I heard, Corman up, Doc, Doc. I knew it. I saw it. And I knew that I had to crawl out there and patch him up. The thought of crawling across the jungle floor with bullets flying overhead was not a pleasant thought. And those tracers didn't look so pretty anymore. And I could hear the drill sergeant from Camp Pendleton yelling in my head, butt down, head down, crawl, crawl, crawl. I finally made it to the private, a handsome kid, about 19 years old, tall and slim, although his flak jacket and other gear added 30 pounds to him. Well, it wasn't a headshot. He'd have a chance to go home. He was breathing, he was moving, he wanted his M16. He was mad as hell that he hadn't inflicted more pain on the enemy. These were all good signs. He had a small hole in his gut right under the corner of his flak jacket. Easy to patch. Not the case for the backside. Big hole. It could have been much worse. I knew I could stop the bleeding. I knew I could patch him up. But dragging his butt back to cover was going to be much more difficult. I finished what I had to do. And then I yelled, cover us, we're coming in. An hour in a firefight is a lifetime. When there's only one color of tracers left in the air, the firing stops. The silence hurts your ears. Everyone is afraid to move. Finally, someone stands up, and we're on our way back to the LZ carrying the private. I had many duties as a hospital corpsman when I was in Vietnam. And one of those duties was to hold sick call in the local villages. This was both rewarding and scary at times. Sick call would usually be held outside. And if it was raining, we would try and find a classroom or a public building if the village had one. And if it was inside, it would be a dark room. There was no electricity in these classrooms, only a hole in the wall that served as a window and the only source of light. There might be a table or two in there and maybe a couple of chairs. When I went on sick call, I would have a translator with me to help me communicate with those that I was examining or talking to. And I would also have a squad of Marines that would watch my back. Normally, sick call was an orderly event. We would enter the village, and those who wanted to be seen would start to line up. They would watch us very intently, mostly in silence. And as we started getting things organized and set up, the villagers would relax and start talking with each other. In fact, I think they even like to argue with each other because the sound of their voice and their chatter increased in volume until it became a cacophony of noise that just never ended. When sick call started in earnest, I would be totally focused at the job at hand. trying to shut out all that extra noise, trying to listen to my translator, examining my patient. And at this point, the squad of Marines would have to be on high alert because I wouldn't be paying attention to any of that. I remember this one morning, we were in a classroom. It wasn't raining, but everything was soaking wet from the night before. And so we chose to be in the classroom. I remember there was a cool breeze blowing through the village, which helped with the humidity. Everything was going smoothly. I was examining a little girl's foot. She stepped on some razor wire and had some deep cuts in the bottom of her foot. She even had an infection going on. When all of a sudden, it became silent. Everybody stopped talking. I could feel the change in the air. A young man in black pajamas had jumped through the open window and grabbed my medical bag and was heading for the door. I stood up and looked at him, not knowing what to do. No one was moving. And I was thinking, do I draw my 45? No, I'm not that good of a shot. And just then, out of a dark corner near the door, stepped a lance corporal and clotheslined the guy in black, who went down really hard. The lance corporal leaned down, grabbed my bag, and tossed it to me. And he said, "Sorry for the interruption, Doc." I turned around and looked at the little girl. She smiled, and I went back to work on her foot. The next time I looked up, the young man in black was gone. I don't know what happened to him, and I didn't ask. I finished the call, and we headed back to the LZ. It was a moment of reflection for me. And I remember thinking, that young man in black could have done 100 things worse than trying to steal my bag. I don't know if that little girl's smile was meant for me, but I took it anyway. I don't remember the number of sick calls I went on. I don't remember the number of patrols or the number of wounded after that first kid. I try to remember the handshakes, the thanks, Doc, the nods as they were airlifted out. I try to remember the smiles on the faces of the children and their mothers as I held sick call in the villages. Did I do any good? I don't know. I was there. I did my duty. If I had not been there, maybe that first kid and many others would not have made it home. That's what I want to believe. And lastly, I want to say I'm extremely grateful to the Marines that I served with, those who made it home and those who did not. I'm grateful for their skill and their faithfulness to duty, because if it hadn't been for that, I wouldn't be here today. Thanks, guys. Welcome home.
Oh, Kenneth, just great stories.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. I mean, the descriptions, and especially of that first fight, are terrifying. And I loved
It
how
was. It was.
and all those thoughts going through your head, and it's just amazing.
Yeah. I want to ask, does anybody know the name of the poem that my 10th grade teacher tried to get me to know? It was If by Wadsworth. If you're a man, you'll have to look it up. It's a great poem. I did learn it.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
It was
Thank you.
wonderful to hear those stories, especially on today. In an email, you told me that working again on the Vietnam stories had been a walk down memory lane, lots of happy and sad experiences.
Yeah.
But then you quote, this is a quote from you, but that is the fullness of our lives. And I want to thank you again, Kenneth, for sharing these stories and your experiences with us.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, did I say that you are the founder? Yeah, I did. I
Yeah,
did
yeah, you
say
did.
at the beginning.
Okay, you did.
Sorry. Thank you again, Kenneth. Wow. Our next teller is Tim Araneta. Hi, Tim. Tim has just returned from the National Storytelling Festival held in Jonestown, Tennessee. He was one of 4 new voices. Congratulations, Tim.
Thank you.
Tim has always lived in California, except for when he attended Northwestern University and was a student of the theater program. And he expected to emerge as a stage actor or playwright, but on the way he discovered storytelling. He tells fairy tales, familiar favorites, and nearly forgotten stories that deserve new listeners. These stories are as relevant today as they were when they were first told hundreds of years ago. And this is a quote, and perhaps a warning. But don't expect unicorns and rainbows. He tells tales in all their grim details, where parents abandon their children in the woods to witches and monsters. And happy endings may include justice served up with an axe. I can't wait. Please, Tim, tell us a story.
Thank you, Katie. And thanks, everyone, for joining us at the Do Tell Sonoma Story Swap Telebration. Today, I have a wonder tale from Central Asia. It's a story from the Uyghurs, and it starts like this. Once upon a time, there was a young man named Shadan, and Shadan was a fisherman. His father was a fisherman. His father had raised Shadan alone, and every day they'd go down to the river, throw in their net, and bring up fish. Day in, day out, they made a meager living at it. But one day, as they were pulling their net out, they saw the most enormous carp they'd ever seen. It was bigger than the 2 of them put together. And Shadan and his father pulled and they pulled, but the fish was too heavy, too strong to come out of the water. They couldn't get it to shore. So the father said, Shadan, run home and get the axe. Then I can deal a killing blow to the fish. And that's the only way we're going to get it to shore. So making sure his father had good hold of the net, Shadan let go and ran home. But he couldn't find the axe. And so he came back to the shore, grabbed onto the net and said, Father, I'm sorry. I couldn't find the axe. And his father's like, you foolish boy. All right, anchor yourself. Hold on tight. Don't let this fish go. I'm going to have to go find the axe. And his father left. Now, no sooner was Shadan there on the edge of the river, holding the net, alone with the giant carp, when the carp spoke to him. Young man, please do me a favor and let me go, for I am a parent. I have young ones at home. Can you imagine them losing a parent? Have mercy on me. And Shadan, his heart was touched. He wanted to show compassion, but he knew his father would get angry. And he said, I'm sorry. I can't let you go. My father would punish me. And the carp said to Shadan, well, let's do this. When your father returns, let me know. I'll thrash about wildly, and you can unbalance yourself and accidentally let go of the net. And that way I will be safe. I can return to my children. And Shadan said, but my father will be so angry. If, said the carp, if your father threatens you, jump into the river and I will defend you with my life, said the carp. Well, Shadan agreed to the plan. And when he saw his father coming, he let the carp know, and the carp began to thrash wildly back and forth in the net. And Shadan made a big show of leaning off balance until finally the net slipped from his hand, and net and fish disappeared beneath the river's surface. And Shadon's father was outraged. "How could you, you foolish son of mine?" And he ran towards Shadon, and he still had the axe in his hand. Shadon was terrified, and he turned and jumped into the river. And no sooner had he done so than that giant carp opened its mouth wide and swallowed him whole and swam away down to the bottom of the river. And Shadon was safe there in the belly of the giant carp. And he stayed there for 1 day. He stayed there for 2. He stayed there for 3. For 7 days, he was in the belly of the carp until at last he said, "Dear friend, I think I would like to be back on shore now, that I may live my life among my own kind." And the carp swam up to the shore of the river and spit out Shadon. Shadon didn't recognize where he was. They had traveled a long way downriver. But the carp said, "Farewell, my friend. If you ever need assistance again, come back to this spot and jump in the water, and I will give what aid I can." Shadon thanked the fish and began to walk down the river. And he noticed this part of the river was traveling through a very deserty part of the landscape. No sign of villages or anyone living nearby. So he walked and he walked and he walked a long time. He walked all day until he saw the beginnings of a forest. And next to the river, there was a large cliff that went up and up. And then he saw, oh, there's a nest up there. But he heard the cry of alarm from the nest, shrieking and squawking. And then he saw 2 vultures peek over the edge of the nest. They were baby vultures, and they were crying, "Help, help us. There is a serpent approaching, a serpent who means to eat us all up." And sure enough, Shadon looked, and there was a great black serpent crawling up the side of the cliff. And you could see it was about to eat those baby vultures. So Shadon ran as fast as he could. He ran around the side, climbed up to the top of the cliff, and looking down, he managed to take up a big rock, and he aimed carefully and dropped it on the head of that snake, crushing the snake and saving the baby birds. And he asked the baby birds, "Are you all right?" And the bird said, "Yes, thank you so much. Come down here to our nest." And Shadon crawled down there. And the baby bird said, "Our parents will be so pleased that you have done us a kindness and saved us from that terrible serpent. But if they find you here in the nest, they're going to think you're attacking or trying to steal us. You better hide under our wings." Now, these were baby vultures, but they were large, so they stretched their wings over Shadon, and he crouched down. And just a moment later, 2 enormous vultures circled down out of the sky, gliding lower and lower until at last they flapped their wings once to land right in the nest. And that flap was so powerful, all the trees in the forest shook. Now, the parent vultures had a hedgehog that they were going to feed to the babies, and they expected the babies to be screaming and saying, feed me, but that's not what their little baby vultures were saying. They were saying, "Mother, father, we have a question for you. If a stranger did us a kindness, would it not be appropriate to do a kindness in return?" Oh, and at this, the parent vultures were so pleased. "Well, yes, of course. Oh, we're so glad you are listening, children. Yes, of course we would do that." "Well, then look over the side of the nest and you will see that a stranger has saved us from the terrible serpent." And sure enough, they looked over, they saw the crushed head of the snake, and they said, "Oh, happy day. Our foe has been vanquished. Who can we thank for this?" And the baby vultures lifted their wings to show off Shadon, said, "This young man has saved our lives." And Papa Vulture said, "Young man, if there is anything in the world you wish, we will do everything in our power to help you obtain it. What is your wish?" And Shadon said, "I don't have a wish right now, but I was happy to help." And the Mama Vulture said, "Take this feather with you." And she plucked a feather from her wing and gave it to Shadon and said, "If you ever need our help, just burn this feather and we will notice the smoke and come find you and lend our assistance." Well, Shadon thanked Mama and Papa Vulture, said goodbye to the baby vultures, and went on his way. And he walked and he walked and he walked a long time until he came to the foot of the mountain, and there he saw a man with a bow drawing the string back. And Shadon looked and could see he was aiming at a fox. And he called out to the hunter, "Sir, noble sir, uncle, please don't shoot that fox. Just imagine that fox might have cubs. It might have babies. Spare that parent's life." Well, the hunter put his bow down and went away. And no sooner had he done that than the fox sprang over to Shadon and said, "Young man, I am indeed a mother, and I thank you for helping me, for sparing my life. Is there anything I can do for you?" "No, I don't think so," said Shadon. I'm just off to seek my fortune." And the fox said, "Well, if there's anything you ever need, come back to this mountain and light this bush on fire, and I will smell it and come and lend you my aid." Well, Shadon thanked the fox, and he went on, and he walked and walked and walked for another day until he came to the capital city. Now, this was an exciting place, and apparently it was an exciting day in the city. When he walked through the gates, he saw everybody running in the same direction. And so he joined the crowd. He said, "Why are we running?" "Oh, don't you know? Today's execution day." "Oh, execute. Ooh, that doesn't sound good. What's happening?" "Well, they're going to execute someone." "Oh, a murderer, I suppose?" "Oh, no. They're going to execute a suitor of the princess." Now, at this, Shadon was very confused. And when he got to the public square where he could see there was a man about to have his head chopped off, he said, "I don't understand what this man did." And the people around him exclaimed, "Well, you see, the daughter of the king, the princess, she's eligible to get married, but she has very strict conditions. She said, if anyone wants to marry me, they must hide for 3 days. And on the third day, I will come and find them. And if I find them, it's off with their heads. But if they can hide successfully from me, well, then I will marry that man." Now, what the people did not know, apart from the fact that the princess always won and that a lot of young men had lost their heads, was that she had a magic mirror. And on the third day, when she went out to look for those suitors hiding, she would look in the mirror and direct its gaze here, there, everywhere, in, out, up, down, and she always found them. Shadon turned and left the square before the execution happened. He was sick to his stomach. "I can't believe how cruel this place is. All these young men going to their deaths. They said at least a dozen have lost their lives, and I can imagine this person will be executed, and the next suitor, and the next, and the next. I wonder if there's anything I can do to put a stop to this." And he thought, and he thought, and he thought. Well, the very next day, he presented himself at the castle because he had a plan. And he announced himself. He said, "Please tell your princess that I am here as a suitor for her hand in marriage, and let her name any contest, any challenge. I am up to it." And so the steward took the message to the princess, and the princess said, yeah, tell him the usual business. Go and find a place to hide. If I can find him, he loses his head. But if he successfully hides from me after 3 days, and I can't find him, I will agree to marry him. And the steward came and explained all this to Shadon, and Shadon left the castle, and straight he walked for 3 days until he at last got to the very edge of the river where he had left his friend the carp. And he jumped in the water, and the carp said, "What do you need, Shadon?" And Shadon said, "I need a place to hide, or it's my life." And he explained the whole situation. And the giant carp said, "Of course, you have saved my life, I will save yours." And so he swallowed Shadon again, and Shadon went down in that carp's gullet. It's a familiar place. The carp swam down to the very bottom of the river and hid in a dark crevice, but not before telling all the smaller fish there to swim to the surface and kick up as much mud and silt from the shoreline as they could. So that clear water suddenly became very muddy and murky. Well, it was time for the princess to seek out her suitor. So she climbed to the top of the tower in her castle. She took that magic mirror and she gazed into it, and she looked everywhere she thought the suitor might be hiding, in mountains and in bushes and in caves. A lot of the suitors hid in caves, and not seeing them, she then turned her attention to the lakes and the ponds and the rivers. And then she noticed something strange in her magic mirror. There was a spot in the river that was all muddy and murky, which was strange because the rest of the river was flowing clear. So she had her mirror work its magic and peer closer and closer, and she could see under the water. She could see all the fish kicking up the silt. She could see the crevice. She could see the carp in the crevice. She could see inside that stomach of the carp. That's where her suitor was hiding. She called her minister and her guards. Go to such and such a place on the river, and you'll have to shoo away all these little fish, and then the water will be cleared, and then you'll see a crevice, and throw the net down, catch the carp, and bring up the carp. That's where the suitor is hiding. Well, the minister and the guards, they all went, and they were able to shoo away the little fish. They brought up the carp, and they shouted down in the water, "You may as well come out. We know where you are." And Shadon said to the carp, "My friend, you might as well spit me out. I'm a man of my word." And so Shadon came out and went gladly with the guard and the minister all the way back to the castle, where he was surprised to see that the king himself was arguing with his daughter. "Now, daughter, you have to give this young man one more chance. He's more clever than any of the other suitors. No one else has ever hidden in the belly of a carp. Give him another chance." At last she said, "Fine, father, I will. All right, hide again. I will look for you in 3 days' time." And this time, Shadon went to find the vulture. When he got far enough outside the city, he burned that feather, and the smoke went up into the sky, and soon he saw a giant vulture circling, and it came down and landed near him. "What can I do for you, my young friend?" And Shadon said, "I need a place to hide," and explained that the princess would cut off his head if she found him in 3 days' time. "Climb on my back," said Papa Vulture, "and we will stay up in the sky, never moving. We will be always on the move, gliding above the clouds. She won't find us." And so Shadon climbed on the back of Papa Vulture and sailed soaring up into the sky, higher and higher above the 7 layers of clouds. And for 3 days, he stayed up there, soaring, only coming down when the vulture needed to get a drink of water. Well, on the 3rd day, the princess took out her magic mirror, and she looked here and there, north, south, east, west. No sign of her suitor in any cave or forest, or at the bottom of any lake or pond. Then she turned her magic mirror up to the clouds, the 1st layer, the 2nd layer, the 3rd layer, the 7 layers, and then above, and aha! She saw a giant bird with a man on its back, and she looked in that mirror, and she saw, "That is my suitor." She called her minister and her guards, and she said, "This is going to be a tricky one because he's too high up for your arrows to bring him down. But I happen to know that vultures need to drink water, so go to such and such a mountain and wait by such and such a pool." The guards and the ministers did just that, and when the vulture landed, Shadon hopped off to stretch his leg and himself to get a drink of water. And at that, the guards and ministers jumped out and grabbed him, and the vulture was so startled he flew off. And, well, Shadon was a man of his word. He went back with the guards and the minister to accept his fate. But to his surprise, the queen was arguing with her daughter. "Now, daughter, this man is very, very clever. No one else thought to hide up in the sky above the clouds. You got to admit, he's smarter than your other suitors." "All right, mother, all right, I'll give him one last chance. But listen, you. My father argued for you. My mother argued for you. There's no one else who's going to argue for you. If I find you this time, it's off with your head." Shadon agreed, and he went off. Well, this time, he knew he had to talk to the fox. And he went to the mountain where he had met the fox, and he lit that bush on fire. And when the fox smelled the burning, she came running. And she said, "What do you need, my friend?" And Shadon explained that he needed a place to hide, and how he would lose his head if he couldn't. And the fox smiled and said, "Shadon, you should have come to me first. I mean, when people talk about the most clever animal, the most cunning, do they say, go find the carp? No, they do not. Do they say, oh, the vulture, he's the cleverest and most cunning? No, they do not. They talk about the fox. And I have a plan. Just stay right here. I'll take care of it." And she started to dig right next to him. She dug a little hole. And then she popped her head out and said, "I might be a while, but don't worry. Trust me. Stay here." And she just kept digging and digging and digging. And Shadon waited and waited. And 1 day went by, and 2 days, and now it was the 3rd day. He knew the princess was about to climb up in her tower and look through the magic mirror. And that's when the fox popped back up through the hole and said, "All right, here's what you're going to do. You're going to climb into this tunnel, and you're going to go all the way to the end. There, you'll know you're at the end. There's a little tiny pinprick of light because I just have a little tiny hole to let the sun shine in." "Where does the tunnel go?" said Shadon. "It goes all the way to the base of the princess's tower. She won't think to look right beneath her feet." And so Shadon thanked the fox, and he climbed into that little burrow, and he made his way on his hands and knees all the way back to the capital city under the earth until he saw that little pinprick of light, and he knew he was right underneath the tower. The princess was by now up in the tower with her magic mirror, looking this way and that, even up above the clouds, this way and that. She looked north, south, east, and west. There was no sign of her suitor, and she was getting frantic. She'd never gotten this close to actually marrying someone before. She was getting mad, actually. How was this possible? She had a magic mirror. How could this stranger from another, this shabbily dressed stranger, how could he out? She got so mad, she clenched that mirror so tight, she broke it into 1,000 pieces. Well, that was the end of that. She walked down out of her tower, standing on the ground, and she turned to her parents and all the ministers and said, well, I guess I'm going to marry this stranger. He's successfully hidden from me. And hearing that, he popped his head through the ground, and he was just almost right underneath her. And he said, all right, here I am. Well, her mother and her father, the king and queen, were so pleased. They took him right into the castle. They had him clean up. They put him a fancy robe, and they held a feast that very evening, a pre-wedding feast. There were 41 nobles and relatives there, and they had wonderful food and drink, and they asked Shadon to make a speech. And he said, I am honored, and I thank you for this celebration and this feast, but I have some distressing news for you. I have no wish to be married to this princess. I only entered the contest because I could not abide the cruelty I experienced in this place. I am returning to my home, and I wish you all a good life. And with that, he left, returned to his home. All the nobles and ministers and the king and queen were dumbfounded. The princess herself, her face was white with rage. And whether they ever turned over a new leaf and became kind, I'll leave it up to you to imagine. And that is the story of Shadon, the fisherman's son.
Oh, that was wonderful. I just loved how it just progressed, from the carp and what came in, the carp and was the vulture next? Yes, the
Vulture, you're right. And then the fox.
fox. And of course, so well told, and it's so visual, you can see it all. And yeah, and so the princess remained single, I guess.
At least she's still single.
Yes, she's still single. Thank you so much. I just really enjoyed that. I'm sure everybody else did too. It was perfect. Thank you. So our next teller is Sharon Elwell. Sharon has taught music, Spanish, ESL, and every grade level in the California school system. This has provided a treasury of experiences that delight her audiences with humor, surprise, and compassion. She is the author of several memoirs about these experiences. She shares her stories at the Do Tell Story Swap each month and with her grandchildren. We are in for a treat. Please welcome Sharon Elwell to the stage.
Thank you. When I found out that I was going to be filling in to do this, I decided to practice this upcoming story without thinking that anybody who heard me practice was going to be among the group tonight. So Lashama and Walter, you can both just rest because you've heard this story already just lately. In a remote village in Guerrero, there lived a young man named Bernardo. Bernardo was very well off. He had dinero, he had una casita, but he didn't want to get married. He said, oh no, las mujeres hablan y hablan y gastan dinero. No, 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 no. But the problem was that Bernardo really loved good food, and he didn't know how to cook. And restaurants are expensive. And one day his friend Elena said to him, Bernardo, why don't you just hire a cook? Ah, of course. So he made a poster and he took it down to the mercado and put it up. And the poster said, Cuarto gratis por una mujer que sabe coser. Free room for a woman who knows how to cook. And then he went home to wait. Well, the very next day, there was a knock at the door and a young woman. And she said, Soy viudita que sepa coser y necesito una ventana que puedo ver. I'm a young widow and I learned how to cook, and I need a window out of which I can look. So Bernardo invited her in and he showed her the kitchen. And she said, Oh, bien, bien. And then he showed her the bedroom that had a big picture window. And she said, Oh, bien, bien. And so he gave her money to go to the mercado to buy food. And once again, he waited. And that evening, he smelled the most wonderful smells coming out of that kitchen. Cebolla and ajo and pollo. Oh, and soon she brought him a big platter of arroz con pollo. And he ate every last drop. He would have licked the plate if he didn't think it was rude. And he was so full, so stuffed that he couldn't stay awake. And so right after dinner, he went straight to bed and fell asleep. And he woke up thinking that that was the best meal of his whole life. But later in that day, he smelled chiles being charred in the kitchen. And once again, he could hardly wait. And here came a big platter of chiles rellenos. Ah, and once again, he ate and ate and ate until he was so full that he couldn't keep his eyes open. And he went straight to bed and went to sleep. Well, they went on that way. On Sunday, she outdid herself. She made his very favorite chile verde and arroz con leche, rice pudding. Bernardo was beginning to think marriage wasn't such a bad idea after all. And so he said, Cookie, why don't we get married? And she said, Bien, bien. And so they did. One day, not long after, she was at the market when his friend Elena came over. And she said, Bernardo, I heard you got married. And he said, I did. And she said, What do you know about this woman? And he said, Well, I know that she is the greatest cook in the world. And Elena said, Do you even know her name? And he said, I just call her Cookie because she can really cook. And Elena said, Do you realize that she flies out of that window every night? Bernardo was horrified. And so that night, when she brought him his dinner, he didn't eat it. When she turned her back, he pushed it into a planter and noticed that that plant fell right over. He waited until it seemed like he would have finished his dinner, and then he went off to bed as he always did. But he stayed awake and watched. And not long after, she came into the room. She went into the corner and she began to spin round and around. And as she spun, she said, Piel, piel, quítamelo, quítamelo. And her skin came right off. And there she stood, una esqueleta con alas. And that skeleton went right to the window and flew off into the night. Bernardo was terrified. He went to the window and nailed it shut. And then he went to the front door and nailed that shut. And then he pushed the heavy bureau in front of it just for good measure. And then he took a pillow and stuffed it up the chimney and went back to bed to see what would happen. It was nearly dawn when he heard the sound outside, clickety-clack at the window. And then clickety-clack, clickety-clack at the door. And then another up on the roof. And he waited. He knew that if the sun came up, that skeleton would dissolve into dust, which is what a used skeleton should do. And so he waited until the sun was well up and he knew he was safe, and he came out. He went to find his friend Elena and he said, "Oh, you were right. I married a witch." And she said, "Well, we've got to go warn the townspeople." And so down they went to the village and they went from door to door and they warned everyone. But that witch was never seen nor heard from again. After a little while, Bernardo looked at Elena in a different light, and she thought, and he thought, you know, I know her name, and I know she's human, and I know who her parents are, and I know that she's a good cook. Elena, why don't we get married? And so they did, and they lived happily after that. And the witch, as I said, never made another appearance. But if you are ever traveling in Guerrero and you find yourself in a remote village and you see that all the windows are boarded shut, don't stay there to spend the night.
Oh, Sharon, that's such a great story. And I love how you use English and Spanish. I feel I'm almost bilingual. So great. And I love that question. Do you even know her name? And, you know, it reminds us that we do need to think for ourselves. We do need to ask questions. It's just so great. It's a lovely story. So thank you so much. Really appreciate that. So our next teller is Ben Tucker, and he's known as Brother Ben. He was an All-American and international track star and a lifelong educator, a singer, author, and gifted storyteller. His stories are of historical figures, personal stories, and folk tales. He is a board member of the Storytelling Association of California and the Prescott Circus Theater of Oakland, California. Through his storytelling, he shares experiences that inspire, connect generations, and celebrate the power of perseverance and voice. Please welcome Brother Ben to the Do Tell Story Swap stage.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this evening on Veterans Day. And I want to start out by thanking all of the veterans in the audience around the country and throughout the world who are currently serving duty or democracy abroad. I want to tell you a story about the African-American soldiers during World War II. And I was born in the midst of that time. And I was born in Louisiana in the middle of the height of Jim Crow. Now, my father was a welder, and he was recruited by the Bethlehem Steel Company to come out to San Francisco and do shipbuilding for the war effort. He came out before my family met him, and we all came out and met him, and we took the train from Louisiana. And it's my first childhood memory riding that train. And that train was what we call the Jim Crow train. It was on a Jim Crow track, and it was one of my first experience with Jim Crow. Now, during that same time, 1941-42, there was a call to arms for all of the men, able-bodied men in the country, to either work in the civil defense plants, which my father was doing, or join the army. And in the African American community at that time, there was a debate going on. Why should we fight for the freedom of others abroad when we're denied it here at home as a people? Should we be patriotic Americans and go fight for rights that are denied here? And so in 1942, the Pittsburgh Courier, an African-American newspaper, very influential, took up this debate, organized discussions around it, and they came up with a recommendation for all of the civil rights organizations, community organizations, and church to rally around what was called the double V: victory abroad against fascism and victory at home against racism. And they were able, through their publications and publications of other African-American newspapers, to rally African-American men to go and fight for their country, with the caveat being that while we are fighting fascism abroad, we want our brothers and sisters at home to fight against Jim Crow, because we don't want to come home and find out the freedoms that we fought and liberated people for are denied us. Now, there is an example of this in one particular soldier whose story is captured by that dilemma, because victory at home was something that was very, very elusive and very hard to achieve. And I think this story that was developed by one of my colleagues at Stagebridge, Hillary Kaiser, captures this. And it's about a young soldier from West Virginia who was stationed in Europe, and he meets a French woman. They start to date, and they fall in love, and she's pregnant. And this soldier goes to his commander and asks for permission from the military to wed his fiancée, who is carrying his child. It happens all the time with white soldiers. Never was a problem. He had witnessed it. But he was denied, and he was very, very angry, very frustrated. And so I'm going to tell you what he did. This is the monologue from Hillary's play. Young Sergeant Lawson Day had just been given his last denial to marry his fiancée and bring her back home to the US of A. And he's quite angry, he's very upset, and he's very frustrated. He has exhausted all means through the army to marry the woman that he loves. It ain't fair. It just ain't fair. But who was I kidding? Things ain't ever been fair for Black folks in America. I love this woman and they won't let me marry her. I can't stay here in Europe. I can't bring her back to America. What am I going to do? But then I got a crazy idea. If the army wouldn't help me, I was going to go above their heads because I'm an American citizen. I'm in the military. I have my rights. And so, what he did, he sat down on his bunk and said, I'm going to write a letter, and I'm going to write a letter to the U.S. Supreme Court. Sat down on that bunk of his, got a piece of paper and pen, and he commenced to write. And as he was reading aloud, he would also interrupt his writing with his thoughts. His letter goes like this. Dear Honorable Sirs. Wait a minute, should I call them sirs? Are there any women on the Supreme Court? Never heard tell of any. No, don't think there are any. Sirs. Dear Honorable Sirs, I am a regular Army man with 5 years of service in the U.S. Army. Now, I landed in Normandy with my battalion, all Black battalion, because, as you know, sirs, the Army is segregated. Now, should I tell them about my medals? Nah, they might think I'm bragging. Oh, what the hell? I won those medals. I need to put that in there. I landed in Normandy, and with my battalion, I helped liberate France. And after the war, I was given 4 battle stars. Now, I re-enlisted and asked to remain in Europe. I was stationed in France, and I met a French woman at the Red Cross. Maybe I shouldn't mention where we met. No, I'll take that out. They don't need to know where we met. Where I met a French woman, Mademoiselle Paulette Dupree. We fell in love. I asked her to marry me. And in 1946, she gave birth to my child. As soon as I found out she was pregnant, I applied to my commanding officer, Major Rick Dennison, for permission to marry my fiancée. But he refused to grant me permission because he said I was from a southern state, West Virginia, and West Virginia doesn't allow Negroes to marry white women. Sirs, I believe the Constitution of the United States says that it is unlawful to discriminate against a man because of his race, creed, or color. I beseech thee to please allow me to marry my fiance so that I can become the legal guardian of my child. Now, let's see. How should I end this? In the name of democracy and justice, I plead with you. I want to do the right thing. I do not want to abandon my fiance and my child and return to the United States without them. I guess that's about it. Respectfully yours, Private First Class Lawson Day. He seals up the letter, he stamps it, takes it to the post office, mails it off to the U.S. Supreme Court. And he says, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Now you ask me what happened after that? Nothing. For weeks, for months, nothing happened. I became distraught, didn't know what to do. My fiance, Paulette, was in France. I was in Germany. She was living with her parents. I had to carry on my duties just like nothing was happening. But then one day, I was summoned to meet with my commander, Commander Dennison, the very man who had denied my request. And he sat me down and he said, "Did you write this letter to the Supreme Court?" I said, "Yes, sir, I did." And he said, "Well, the Supreme Court sent your letter to the Pentagon, and the Pentagon wrote our commander and said that I had misinterpreted the laws, those miscegenation laws in the South, that I was not to deny you the right to wed your fiance. I was only supposed to inform you that if you married her and returned to the U.S., you would not be allowed to return with her to the state of West Virginia because of those laws. Now, if you want to, you can move anywhere in the U.S., and we will allow you to bring her over here to Germany, and she could be wed by the chaplain, and you can live on the base. And of course, those housing was segregated at the time as well. And that's exactly what I did. I got Paulette over here with my little son, who I had seen for the very first time, little Philippe. And we lived on the base. And I did another year in Europe because I wanted to go back home and be eligible for the GI Bill and go to college. And that's exactly what we did. In 1947, I mustered out of the Army, didn't go back to West Virginia with her, couldn't go back to West Virginia with her. She couldn't meet my family, and we ended up buying a house in Indiana. And that's where we lived until 1967. There was a law suit that went all the way up to the Supreme Court, the same Supreme Court that I had written my letter to. And it was Loving versus the state of Virginia. And Mr. Loving was a white man who wanted to wed a black woman, and it was forbidden. And he took his case all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they won. And that case knocked down all of those miscegenation laws in the South. And as a result of that, I was able to move my family from Indiana back to my home state of West Virginia. Bought a house right there in the neighborhood, beautiful home near my friends and relatives, and my wife, for the first time, had a chance to meet her in-laws. Now, you might want to know, am I bitter? Sure. I'm not going to lie to you. I was very bitter, extremely bitter. Bitterness almost chewed me up because I had fought, I had seen my buddies die, bleed, and then to be denied the freedom to marry and to take care of my son. But I tell you what, I'm not bitter anymore. No, not anymore. Because me and Paulette, we've been married for 47 years. We have 5 children and 12 grandkids. But you know, sometimes when I'm sitting here in this old rocking chair and that old sun is going down in West Virginia, and I sit and I rock and I think, what would have happened if I hadn't put my rifle down, picked up that pen, and wrote that letter to the Supreme Court? My whole life would have been different. So bitter? No, I'm not bitter. Because we fought at home against racism and Jim Crow, and we fought on the battlefields against fascism and Hitler, and we won. Yes, indeedy, we won. Thank you.
Wow, Brother Ben, that was such a powerful story. And I loved the writing of the letter and how he corrected. That was so touching and so human, and yeah, very powerful. Thank you so much for bringing that story to us, especially on today, with Veterans Day. Thank you. My Brother Ben. Wow. I just need to take a deep breath after that. We've had some wonderful stories, and we have one more teller. We have Rose Owens. Rose has been telling stories professionally and as a volunteer for over 50 years. She writes many of the stories and adjusts other stories to provide a unique storytelling perspective. She shares her stories each month at the Do Tell Story Swap, and many of her stories reflect the joys and adventures of growing up as part of a blended family with 16 children. Her grandchildren know that whenever Grandma comes to visit, there will be stories. Rose has a delightful story to share with us this evening, bringing the baby home. Please welcome Rose to the stage.
Having a baby is an exciting event. And the next exciting thing is bringing the baby home. Now, when I had my children, it was customary to keep the mother in the hospital for 3 days, which was fine. That gave me time to bond with my new baby, get some rest, maybe attend a how to bathe the new baby demonstration, and possibly even read a book. And then it was time. They'd put me in a wheelchair and put my baby in my arms and wheel me to the front door, and my husband would be there to greet me, and then we would bring the baby home. 20 years later, more or less, when my daughters began having their babies, things had changed a little bit. They would have the baby on one day, and the next day, the nurses would put the mama in a wheelchair, put her new baby in her lap, wheel her to the door of the hospital, where her husband was waiting to bring her and the baby home, and they were on their own. Now, back in 1944, when I was born, didn't need to bring the baby home because I was born at home. My brothers and sisters were sent to the neighbor's house, and after the new baby was born, then they were brought home to see their new sister. And that worked out fine. Now, I was the last of my family to be born at home. 5 of my older brothers and sisters were born at home. However, my second oldest sister, Valda, was born in the hospital. Now, this was in 1934. And at that time, it was customary to keep a mother in bed for 10 days after a baby was born. Now, the doctor intended to keep the mother in the hospital for the 10 days. And I don't know whether it was economics or whether mother just didn't want to stay in the hospital, but she wasn't about to stay for 10 days. Dad negotiated with the doctor, and the doctor finally said, if you take her home lying down, you can take her home. So my father borrowed a truck, and he put a mattress in the back of the truck with some blankets, and mother went home from the hospital laying down. Now, this was in February in Utah with snow on the ground. I asked Dad, and he said the baby got to ride in the cab of the truck. Now, after Valda, as I said, 5 more children were born in the hospital at home. My 4 younger brothers and sisters were born in the hospital. And there was me, and I was the last one born at home. And then there was Russell and Eileen and Mark and Ross. Now, Ross arrived 2 months premature. And on the day that he was born, my mother died. And my mother's cousin, Marjorie Bingham, came to my dad and she said, Mark, I'll take care of that baby until you can make other arrangements. And since she was a registered nurse, my father accepted. Now, my aunts, when they heard that my mother had died, they were 180 miles away in Salt Lake, 180 miles away from Vernal. And they were shocked. And they said, I don't know how Mark's going to manage. How is he going to manage with that many children? And they came up with a plan. They came to Vernal with their lightly packed suitcases. And they told Mark that each one of them would take 1 or 2 of the younger children back to Salt Lake with him. My father listened to their idea. And he thanked them. And he said, no, this family stays together. And so after the funeral, they took their lightly packed suitcases and went back to Salt Lake. And we began to figure out how to manage without our mother. That first summer, my brother Larry, who was 13, was the oldest one at home during the day. Agnes was married and had 4 children of her own, and the youngest of hers was 3 months old. My second oldest sister, Valda, worked in town. Philip was up on the mountain at the sawmill, and he was only home on weekends. And Wayne worked at the Coca-Cola bottling plant. Larry at 13 drove the tractor, plowed the garden. We helped plant the garden. We got the irrigation water and we watered the garden. I liked doing that. It was fun to go up and down those rows, making sure that the water stayed near the water, squishing my feet in the mud, wading in the irrigation ditch. If there was produce to be picked, when it was time to harvest, we picked the corn or the beans or the peas. We had them already picked and ready when Valda got home from work. Then we canned or froze them. Now on Thursdays, every Thursday, we did the washing. Now we thought that we had it really good because we had a Dexter twin tub. And you'd put the clothes in the washer and you'd agitate it back and forth, and then you ran them through the wringer. Now Ruby and I always took a stick and put ours through with the stick because we both remembered the day that Ruby got her arm caught in the wringer and it went clear up to her shoulder before the safety mechanism popped loose. And so we used the stick. So when you'd finished the first wash, you took the hold of the wringer and you swung it around. And then it was in the second, and it agitated. And then it went through 2 more rinse of waters. And then we hung them on the line to dry and took them off the line and folded them up. Now, my brother Larry, as I said, he was 13 and he took care of the animals on the farm. We had a horse and we had cows and we had pigs and we had chickens. I had to gather the eggs. Now, you might think that was an easy job, but they weren't in a coop. Our chickens were allowed to run free during the barnyard. And so we'd have to find the nests. Most of the time it was easy because those hens, as soon as they laid an egg, they'd stand by the side of the egg and announce that they'd laid an egg. But there was one sneaky hen that she would lay her egg and then she would go far away before she announced that she'd laid that egg. And so it was a challenge to find out where she had laid that egg. On Sundays, we went to church. And the Binghams were there with Ross. And we would go rushing over to see our baby. And our Eileen, who was 5, would say, "His name's Ross Pope." And their Eileen, who was also 5, would say, "His name's Ross Popey Bingham, and he'll be Ross Popey Bingham until you take him home." Well, that was a challenge. And my father was trying hard. He put an advertisement in the paper for a housekeeper. And several came 180 miles from Salt Lake to Vernal to apply for the job. And the ones that Dad was willing to hire would say, 10 children at home? They didn't want to be a housekeeper with a family with that many children. And the ones that were willing to work for us, Dad wasn't willing to hire. They all had their exacting requirements. There was one who said, "If I take this job, the dog has to go. I am not going to be a housekeeper in a house with a dog." Well, we'd had Shorty for years. There was no way Shorty was going. So my dad gave her a ticket, put her on the bus, and she got to go back to Salt Lake. Dad eventually decided that he guessed that what he needed to do was to marry again. And to put it in his words, he said, "I commenced to think of the widow women of my acquaintance. And I thought of Ella Durfee. Her husband had died the year before in a mining accident, left her with 5 children. So my dad went down to ask Ella out on a date. Now, on that day when he went down to ask Ella out on a date, she was up on the roof with her teenage son, fixing the roof. In those days, Ella always wore a dress, which is not the appropriate attire for being on the roof with a teenage son. So she took a pair of her first husband's bib overalls, and she took that dress and she stuffed that down inside. So when my dad came to ask her out on a date, she was beyond embarrassed. She was mortified, and she would not come down. So he had to ask her out another time. So he called her on the phone, and he said, "I didn't quite think it was appropriate to mention marriage on a phone call." So he asked her out on a date, and she accepted. And they went out on a date. And they sat and talked, and they ate, and they talked about this, and they talked about that. And then he said to her, he said, Ella, would you be willing to come up to Mazer, which was 5 miles from where she lived in town, and take care of my 2 little boys during the day? And to use my Ella's words, she said, I ain't gonna do that. I'd fall in love with those boys and they wouldn't be mine. I ain't gonna do that. So then my dad said, well, I'm not interested in dating for the sake of dating, but if you'd care to step out with me with a view to matrimony, I'd like to take you out again. And she accepted. And then things got interesting at the Durfee household. She had 2 teenagers, Reed and Lorraine. Now, Lorraine proceeded to give her mother dating advice. You don't want to kiss on the first date. And I'm not sure what else she told them. And then they waited up for their mom to come home. And one night they got in the car and they drove all the way to every place that the teenagers used to sit and neck and talk. But they never found them. We later found out that's because they drove 30 miles to Roosevelt to do their dating because they knew that people talked and they didn't want the people in Vernal talking until they knew what they were going to do. Now, one night when Reed and Lorraine were waiting for their mom to get home from a date, they heard the car drive up. They heard the car door shut and they waited and they waited. And they waited, and Lorraine opened the door and peeked out, and they were kissing. When her mother got in the door, she said, Mama, do you know what kissing leads to? Well, yes, Ella did. Kissing leads to marriage, and she accepted, and she and my father were married. Now, that first week that Ella and Dad were married, Dad would come home 5 miles from that town to see how the family was doing. And then he would go up and spend the night with his new bride. Now, during the day, Ella came up to our house in Mazer. There was some arranging to be done because her 4 younger children would be moving in with her. Now, she and Dad would take the smallest bedroom and put in a crib for the baby. And the bigger bedroom upstairs had 2 double beds and a twin bed. Ruby and I were left in our little bedroom downstairs. There wasn't room for anybody else in there. And Mother took 2 twin beds, and she took wood and built a framework. Ella built that framework and bunked those 2 twin beds, and the 5 boys were sharing the downstairs bedroom. Well, after that week, when we moved the 4 kids in, and when things were settled down, well, more or less, it was time to go get Ross. Now, Ella came to my older sister, Valda, and she said, Valda, you go with your dad to get Ross. She says, because if I go, I'm going to cry, and Marjorie's going to cry, and I just can't do it. And Valda said, no, I can't do that. So then she came to my older brother, Philip, and she said, Philip, you go with your dad to get Ross. Ross was 9 months old by now. She said, you go, because if I go, Marjorie's going to cry and I'm going to cry and I just can't do it. And Philip finally said, yes, he would go. Then my dad heard about the plan. And my dad said, no, you're going to be this baby's mama. You're going to go. And Ella said, but I'm going to cry and she's going to cry. And I just can't do it. Yes, you can, my father said. And it turned out that Philip and Dad and Ella went to get Ross. Dad and Philip took the crib apart because Marjorie wanted everything gone on that day. And Ella and Marjorie packed up the diapers and the clothes and the bottles and all the other paraphernalia. It was time to leave, and Marjorie picked Ross up and she held him in her arms and kissed him on the forehead one more time, and then she handed him to his new mother. And Marjorie cried, and Ella cried. Now, back at home, we were all excited, anxious, and wait. And as soon as we heard that car drive in the driveway, we went rushing to the door to see our new brother, our new baby brother. And they brought him in. and it only took us 9 months to bring the baby home. And that's the story of bringing the baby home.
Oh, Rose, that's such a great story. And you add to it each time. I love it. And Ella, she was such an ingenious woman. I mean, nothing would stop her, it seemed. It just like. And you kids worked really hard with all your chores and the gardening and the laundry, and it was just so impressive. It's great.
It's the only way we could manage.
Yeah.
We had to work together. There was no other choice.
Mm.
It all came back to what Dad said, this family stays together.
Well, thank you for that. It was just wonderful. Really great.
So
It has just been such a wonderful evening full of amazing stories. Just amazing. And I know this will stay with me for quite some time. And I wonder if we can just have all the tellers come up onto the screen. Vicky, can you do that? Great.
Sorry, I'm a little slow here. I
That's
gotta
okay.
find
Rose,
everybody.
okay, Rose, can you tell us, do you have any events coming up that you'd like to tell us about? And also, do you have any information you'd like to put in the chat?
okay, on the, what is it, the Saturday, the 22nd, is it the 22nd? Yes, the Tail Spinners are doing a celebration. I will be telling at that. In December on the genre storytelling, I'm sharing a story on there. And the other thing I wanted to share was that on every year at the LDS Temple Grounds in Oakland, California, from November, Thanksgiving time through December, they have Christmas events, Temple Hill events. And 10 years ago, no, closer to 15 years ago, I came forward and I said, why don't we have storytelling there? And I brought storytelling to Temple Hill, and I'm known as the Temple Hill storyteller. And on the 15th, I am going to be telling 2 performances of Christmas stories. And on the 13th, which is a Saturday, I'm going to be telling stories for young listeners, also on Temple Hill. And I will put the information in the chat, the link that will give you the information for that. So that's kind of what's going on with me.
Thank you, Rose. You're going to be very busy.
Yes.
Brother Ben, can you tell us of upcoming events that you'd like to share with us? You're muted.
Yes. 2 upcoming events, month of November. This Saturday, I will be doing another celebration with the Sacramento Storytelling Guild. I'll be on Zoom, and that'll also be in-person telling as well. And then on the 23rd, I am part of a production team of 3 other people, and we are called What's Your Story? And we will be celebrating our 3rd anniversary at the Monkey House in Berkeley on Sunday, November 23rd at 2 p.m. And that is a in-person storytelling performance. And I'll put that information in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Tim, do you have events you'd like to share with us?
I don't have anything coming up right in the near future, but you can always check in on my website, timaraneta.info, whenever you want to see where I'll be appearing next.
Perfect. Thank you. Sharon, what have you got on the calendar?
Well, my upcoming events already came, but I am, I'll be telling in Nicaragua pretty soon. And let's see if I can show you this. I have, I'm going to be telling to this guy who is my new great-grandson, and he lives in Spain. And there's a new program called Zug where you can tell to, it's for grandparents, and you can tell stories to children and they put in all the production values for you. It's really, really a cool program. So if you're interested or you have any children that you want to impress, you can get on there and all you have to do is tell the story and here come the trees and the birds and all of the, stuff. So it's really cool. It's ZOOG, Zug, and they're based in Tel Aviv, and very, very cool.
Great, thank you. Kenneth, I think you said that you didn't have any events coming.
No, I'm actually going back to the wood shop, make some bowls.
Oh.
So thank you.
Well, thank you all so much. I mean, you've made this celebration so rich this evening. It was just wonderful. Just want to thank you all. Yeah, we'll be talking about this. This is, I think, our 15th celebration for the Do Tell Story Swap. I do have just a few thank yous. Thank you to the National Storytelling Network and the Storytelling Association of California for making the evening possible. A huge thanks to the Do Tell Story Swap Committee. We have Meg Brown, who is our co-chair. Thank you, Meg. Yay, you're awesome. Vicki Ness and Sharon Elwell, Beth Wakely, yay, Beth, and Brandon Spars, who can't be with us sadly today. And many thanks to Emma Spars for her generous support, managing the website and creating our stunning posters. And I really want us to give a huge round of applause for Vicki Ness, who is our very gifted and our unflappable technical director, because nobody else wanted to do this. And we're so grateful because you've done such a great job. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Vicki. We all really appreciate it so much. And a very sincere thank you to you, our audience. We so appreciate your enthusiasm and your love of stories. And remember that the swap meets each month on the second Tuesday. And so we hope to see you on Tuesday, December the 9th. And I think that's it, unless we have questions for our tellers.
Thank you, Katie, for all that you've done for us tonight. We really appreciate you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. A pleasure. Yeah.